What?
Good morning to all of you joining. Welcome to our second session of the day, which is hosted by Barry and Joss. We'll just let people trickle in and we will get started. Hope that the heat isn't sweltering you all too much. Thank you for joining us live. I appreciate there's probably been quite a lot of disruption around the UK today, given the soaring temperatures, but thank you for joining us here at the Coaching Summit. We are going to be here throughout the day through till 3 o'clock. We'll also be together throughout the day tomorrow through till 3 o'clock, and Joe and I will be hosting a session on Wednesday at 12 o'clock on how to work with emotions in coaching, and starting to share with us, starting to share with you indeed news of our new coaching program for coaches that we're releasing this week. So thank you for being here. Delightful to see so many faces. Now, Barry and Joss have worked together as coaches in all sorts of different guises in previous careers, and they're here today to share with you what organizations want from coaching and some of the behind the scenes that happens in coaching. So let me hand over now to Barry and Joss. I'm going to put the spotlight on you both so we can see your wonderful faces. And over to you guys.
Thank you very much, Zoe. Nice to see you all virtually. And thank you for joining our session today. So Jocelyn and I are going to focus on why organizations want coaching, and then focus in a bit more detail on how to take those initial engagements and conversations through to conversion and paying corporate clients. So just before we get into that, probably worth a minute or two just to introduce ourselves and our experience. So my name's Barry. I spent over 10 years working predominantly in drugs and alcohol counselling services, really focused on behaviour change, and then I made the move to the corporate world probably about 7 or 8 years ago, where I worked with executives to coach them and lead large-scale cultural change, and actually spent 3 years as an executive advisor running an executive committee. So lots of experience with executives, their decision making, and what makes a difference for them purchasing. Joss, do you want to say a few words about yourself?
Thanks, Barry. Good morning, everybody. Great to see everyone here. I'm a board member and also a non-executive board member. I have been so for the last 20 years for various organizations across various sectors. And like Barry, I've also led large-scale strategic and cultural change, mainly in blue chips in Europe, UK, and also in the US. And alongside that, I've always had a piece of my role where I'm coaching executives. And I'm now starting to coach non-executives. The executives, it was for those who are leading change, and for the non-executives, it's mainly around those that are starting in their role. So it's great to be back with you, Barry, and talking about some of the work we've done together.
Yeah, thanks, Joss. Good to be working with you again. So I think just to call it out up front, I'm a trainee coach, and so is Joss. And I think we spend a lot of time focused on our development, our continuous improvement, what our values are, and the development journey that we need to go on as a coach. I guess our call out today is, if you want to look at corporate clients as paid customers for you, our big call out and our big challenge is take some time out from your journey and really put yourself into the shoes of the organization. So number one, you need to do your research on the organization. You need to look at what their goals are, how they define success, and that's important and probably relatively easy to find. If you look at their social media, or if you look at their annual reports or their website, you'll probably find that published and quite glossy. The other bit of research that we would suggest you do is probably looking more around the reviews, the comments, satisfaction scores, and other metrics that you can find, because in the same way that we will send out a pre-coaching questionnaire to individuals, what you're trying to do here is establish and research the gap where the executive's stuck or the organization is stuck in the movement that it needs to make. And we all know, once you've found the gap, you've found the need for coaching, and that's no different with organizations. The second thing is to really focus in on tailoring your conversation. And having done the research and identified the gap that the business and the organization is struggling with, that allows you to step into those meetings, step into those engagements, and talk from the perspective of the challenge that they have, and tailor your conversation so your services and your offering as a coach helps them close that gap or accelerate them towards the success and the goals that they're under pressure to deliver. And it's that differentiation that will allow you to stand out. I'm sort of head of learning now, and I have lots and lots of people come in and they go through a brilliantly glossy and competent run through of their skills, their experience, and their framework. The ones I pick to work with are the ones that have identified the gap that I'm struggling with and can tell me how they can support me in closing that gap. So really, really focus in on tailoring the conversation. And if you can, have the executive feel that gap in the conversation so they've got a story to go back to decision makers about. Third thing that we'll touch on later on in the session today is about your values. Working with an organization is like working with an individual as well. You need to check for that alignment. And there's 3 sets of values that we would suggest you check. 1, your own. So having clarity on your own values, but then really focusing in on the values and the aspirational goals of the organization. Are they an organization that fit with your values and you feel that you can work with and bring your best work? And also the executive sponsor or the director that you're meeting. You know, if you are going to be coaching and challenging and working with that executive and that organization, you need to make sure there's a line of sight between the 3 sets of values. So we'll touch on that later. Before we get into it, Joss, I know you've got a little bit more context. There's 2 models that we'll reference on a couple of slides. So we've got the Kirkpatrick model of evaluation, and we'll work through that because it's a brilliant, brilliant structure to help you think about those engagements. And we would suggest actually trying to map out that evaluation before the meeting rather than at the end. And then secondly, the niche mapping taken from Joe and Zoe's book, Deciding to Coach, is a brilliant, brilliant diagram that draws together your values, your strengths, the values of the organization, and what an organization is willing to pay for. So we'll come to that as well. But for now, Joss, I'm going to pass over to you for a bit more context on what we're doing today.
Great, thanks, Barry. You're right. The examples we're going to use are when we've either been internal colleagues looking to coach internally as part of a large-scale strategic change or culture piece, or where we've been external providers offering that into large-scale companies. And each of those conversations, either the conversations we have with seniors before they have signed up to having coaching as part of the change piece, each of those conversations and each of those executives is unique. All of them tend to know what they want to achieve, and they can normally state that numerically. You know, our customer scores are this, and we'd like to move them to here. And some of them understand the success is has a significant dependency on how authentically they can lead that change. And they're equipped to do that, often equipped to do that. And some seniors are less aware of that and less equipped at the start of the exercise around some of that work. So the pre-conversation and the preparation for that is really the aim of that, is to give the executives some insight in the conversation so that they have a sense of personal feeling or experience or a story that they can then use to articulate the values of coaching and the impact it will make, and hopefully share that with either others that will make decision about the coaching or that need to be enrolled in being part of the coaching as part of the strategic change piece. How do we do this? By, as Barry said, by exploring the gaps, and particularly the gaps around values. And why do we do it? Because we want to make sure that the scope that we understand, the shared understanding that we get with the clients is really sharp. It matches with our skills and competencies, and we're able to demonstrate that in the conversation. And also we're able to demonstrate good value for money when it comes to negotiating the price as well. But most of all, because Barry and I really love doing this work, we love helping leaders develop an authentic ability to lead, change, and align values. So come along with us, get into the experience of sitting there with seniors and talking to them about what they want to achieve. It's an interactive session, so if you've got questions or comments or experiences that you want to share, pop those in the chat. We're going to give 15 minutes over at the end for a discussion. And yeah, looking forward to it. Barry, over to you. Let's jump in.
Yeah, thanks, Joss. So as I mentioned, we're going to use the Kirkpatrick evaluation model as a framework to think and structure these engagements as you look to convert corporate clients into paid customers. So I'm just going to bring a slide up on the screen, so just bear with me. So hopefully you can see that. What we're suggesting in this space is actually working backwards from results and doing the research at the start. We've dropped down some really useful sort of questions within the model there. If at the end of the session you would like copies of these slides, so you've got these questions, Joss and I have put our LinkedIn details on the next slide, so feel free to drop us a message and drop us a link, and we'll send you the information, so you don't need to worry too much about scribbling down the questions. So as I said, I think starting with the results and starting your engagement by putting yourself into the shoes of the organization and the executives that you're meeting is absolutely key. Trying to understand the pressure they're under from the board, the challenge that they've got, the expectation on their leadership, and the results that they're expected to deliver will be absolutely critical in terms of your engagement and being able to articulate that. So as I said, absolutely research what they publish. Take that with a pinch of salt, because it will be a glossy version of what they want to put out into the world. So I think it's useful to get an idea of their strategic aims, what their aspirations are, the values that they want to live by as an organization. I guess my challenge here is they aren't always in that place. So they may be putting some aspirational values out there, but it doesn't mean that's the culture of the organization, and it doesn't mean that's the performance that it has today. Certainly when Joss and I worked together on a big customer cultural change program, there was some great stuff out there about being customer first and the leadership and the direction the organization wanted. When you actually researched their customer satisfaction scores and had a look across Trustpilot and their complaints process and their SLAs, you really got a very different picture, and you really started to understand where that organization was today. And as I said, once you've got that, you can really have a conversation with the executive about the leadership, the capability, and the gap that organization is struggling with. And as we know, no gap, no coaching, and it's exactly the same for organizations. So do that research, really focus in, and try and be creative in that research as well. Try and dig out and get a real idea of where that organization is, not just what it's presenting itself to be, because that's absolutely critical for you converting corporate clients into paid customers. Joss, and I think sort of moving from results, you've got a bit more information on how to use behavior as a differential as well.
Absolutely. So looking at that level 3 section, behavior, there's some really useful questions under there that might be helpful if you're researching an organization or an individual, to help them understand the work that they might want to be achieving if they're setting out to lead strategic change. And I really like these questions. Does the organization have a set of values, and does the executive behavior align with those values? That's a great question. And how do the values align with your own? And we'll come in towards the end about assessing your own personal values as a coach in relation to the organization and the executive. Now, I wouldn't necessarily take those questions verbatim, but Joe and Zoe encourage us to use clean coaching questions when we're working. And so what I tend to, and Barry, I know you do as well, we use we research the organization and then develop some quite clean, powerful questions that we can use in that pre-conversation. The type of questions I find quite useful are things like, if they're setting out to achieve a customer first strategy, is to ask an executive, when was the last time you met a customer? What did they say? And how did that make you feel? And the answers to those 3 questions immediately give you a line of sight through the organization's values, the executive's individual values, and what the customer values might be. And an understanding of whether there is a link between 3, or how much gap, as Barry mentioned, in between those 3. Now, some of the executives meet customers regularly, so they're able to articulate and answer quickly and describe what the organisation has already underway. So that creates a really refined and narrow scope that we are then able to very much deliver into when we're designing the coaching that follows on. But some executives, that they have less experience meeting customers, and then we have the opportunity to start exploring around the authentic leadership that's needed to lead a customer-first strategy through that third question: how did it make you feel? If I bring that to life with an example, I met quite a senior executive, a member of the group board, in a lovely office, beautiful artwork on the wall, and he had all the symbols that you would expect of a senior executive that are important for him engaging with his investors and the shareholders. So, you know, the Mont Blanc pen and the nice watch and the monogram shirt and all of that. But we quickly established that they weren't necessarily the right symbols to indicate the similar values to colleagues and customers. And we did this through exploring a customer experience. There was, that we both knew, a customer had been chased for money that they didn't owe. Bailiffs got involved, and the two customers were elderly, and English wasn't their first language. So it was an extremely stressful experience for them. So much so that the wife didn't feel confident to leave the house for about a year after the experience. And once, by those three simple questions, he was then able to articulate, look, that's not me, that's not who I am. That's, if I look around at my colleagues, that's not the values that they hold. And that's obviously not the customer values that we want to expound. And so those three clean questions meant that he was supported in understanding the leadership that he needed in terms of leading the change. He was able to articulate the value that coaching would bring. And most importantly, we were able to shape the scope and define that actually we needed to bring the rest of the board with us on this coaching work, enable for all of them to lead the change. Barry, I know you've got experience in tailoring conversation with executives as well that probably is relevant at this point.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Joss. And I think sort of coming down, and once you've got a view of the behavior of the executive and the organization, I think as you're scoping a piece of work to sign up to or propose with a corporate client, you've got to get really, really clear on the learning objective. And I've had sort of mixed experiences with this, to be honest. But I think my learning is it for always to be an explicit question to the director, and really try and get their view on what they perceive to be the learning objective of coaching and why it's being brought into their organization. The trick here is to look for the alignment back through to the results. So can the director articulate the learning objective and how that learning objective integrates back into the wider goals of the organization? If they can't, again, you might have to show your coaching skills and prowess in the room to help get that clarity and alignment with them. I think my experience of obviously being in this position is you will tend to work with more than one director, or you'll have more than one engagement. And my learning is you can do all of the research and all of the learning, but it doesn't always go accordingly to plan. So I'm thinking of one engagement I had with a HR director. I'd done the research. I knew they were separating as an organization. I knew they were looking to drive a huge cultural change in terms of their leadership. They wanted a sort of leader as coach philosophy in their organization. They wanted to empower and really lift up their leaders. So a great conversation about that, a great conversation about how coaching, as we all know, could serve that purpose. The other key stakeholder securing that work was an operational director, as they were having the big restructure in the field force and in the ops team that I was working with. And with the engagement having gone so well, I started off on a similar tact. And I could see his face sort of gradually frowning more and more throughout the engagement, and I would see I was losing him. So I just sort of stopped and just asked him the explicit question: what do you think the objective of coaching is for your organization? And straight away, he was very clear. It's about productivity. I need to increase the productivity of my field force. And with that, I was really able to tailor my conversation. It was in ops. So the more I talked about the ROI of coaching, the more I talked about how we can look at empowering productivity, increasing performance, the role of leaders in terms of facilitating sustainable change and problem solving and empowering people to find the solutions themselves. He was completely bought in at that point. And actually, in the end, he went ahead of the HR director and now has sort of 3 embedded coaches in his organization, which culturally is huge for an operational field force team, because that is not the culture. So I think absolutely do your research. But we talk about intuition and we talk about coaching, gut feels and everything else. I think knowing the results and knowing the framework, but don't be afraid to tailor. And if you're getting stuck, really come back to the objective of that coaching from the director's point of view. Joss, I think you've had a similar moment with the tea trolley, haven't you?
Yes, absolutely, and some executives, and yeah, absolutely. So if I talk a little bit about the reaction and the section of Kirkpatrick's model and some of the questions under there, particularly the one around don't be afraid to dance in the moment. That's a really I love that. I love being able to do that, but I'm only truly able to do it if I've done the proper research and I've got a good understanding of what the executives are after and where they want to go, like Barry was saying. And I think a useful example there might be, I was sat with 2 executives in a late night meeting. One was completely on board with the work and understood what we needed to achieve. Another was maybe still understood it theoretically, but hadn't quite grasped it emotionally and wasn't then at the start of the meeting able to articulate the role that coaching plays. And so we were going through this and I was using the usual questions that tested values and so forth around, what's happening for your customers and how does that make you feel? The organization had really great, strong values, but they were process heavy. So that's where a lot of the customer frustration was coming from. And we were expecting refreshments to arrive halfway through the meeting, and we could hear that tea trolley rattling down the hall as it came. And I could sense all of us slightly leant towards the door, expecting it to come through the door. We're all pretty much gasping for a cup of tea. The trolley wheeled up to the door, paused, and then took off again. And it was so frustrating. All of us were like, and the opportunity then could have been to collectively laugh in frustration at the trolley taking off. But actually at that point, I used the same questions that I'd been asking the more skeptical executive. And I said, what's just happened? And how does it make you feel? And at that point, he released his emotions and he said, oh my God, I had to fill in the form in triplicate and I still can't get a cup of tea. This is so frustrating. Now I understand what it's like for our customers to do the simplest things. And out of the back end of that, because we were dancing in the moment, we were able to have a conversation that really unblocked his understanding around the role that coaching plays in delivering some of the strategic change that they're ambitious to achieve. Barry, I know you're a big fan of using intuition in the moment as well.
Yeah, and I think it's something Joe and Zoe constantly drill into you through the coaching course is, look at your intuition. What's that gut feel? What is that telling you? And be curious about it. And I think it's the same when you're engaging corporate clients and you're looking for that conversion. If something's bubbling up for you or you have that sort of intuition, give you a little nudge or a wink to ask a challenging question or to try a different tact, I think really listen to it. So we've covered sort of three main things, I think, here that are absolutely critical to converting corporate clients into paid customers. I think one is do your research. It's not so easy to get a pre-coaching questionnaire out, but the beauty of the internet and social media and everything else today is there's a lot of information out there. So you certainly can have a good look at where the organization is setting its goals, what sort of success looks like for that organization. And I think that's important. Much more importantly is if you can have a sniff round customer satisfaction metrics, social media, complaints, Twitter, and get a feel for actually where that organization is and what the size of that gap is. Having knowledge of that gap prior to your engagement with the corporate client will be the differential for you securing paid corporate clients, because that gap allows you to do number 2, which is tailor your conversation. And if you can tailor your conversation to be absolutely linked to, this is my coaching offering and this is how it will work with you and this is how it will help you achieve your goals, this is how it will help you close the gap, lead authentically. And as Josh said, if there's moments to dance in the moment where you can have the executive feel the gap in any way, shape or form, or give them a story to leave that room and go and tell the other decision makers in that executive the story that they had. We all know the power of storytelling, and I think that is critical to converting paid clients. The third thing, we've not overly touched on it yet. It's been a thread through what we've talked about, but it's the alignment of those values. So I think anyone that's been on Joe and Zoe's course will have done a values elicitation exercise and hopefully sort of gain some clarity on your values. And there's some great sessions today from Ian and others that focus on values. If you haven't been on the coaching course, again, there's a really great outline of values elicitation within the book, Deciding to Coach. So I'd recommend you pick that up. But having clarity on your values is only one of the steps. You also need to have a look at the values of that organization. Ethically and morally, is it an organization that you're prepared to work with? Can you be in flow? Is there an alignment between what the organization is striving to achieve and your value set? And even within that, what's the executive sponsors' values like? How did they behave in the engagement? What are they like in the engagement? And again, you can do some research. You can look on LinkedIn. Most of them have profiles. Most of them have done speaking opportunities or blogs. And I think having a bit of a research to really think about that alignment of not just whether the organization wants to work with you, but whether you want to work with that organization will be absolutely critical for your reputation and for the sales pipeline of corporate clients that you want to work with. And Josh, I think you can bring all this together nicely with the niche map.
Exactly, yeah. So this is a model that's in Joe and Zoe's book. You can see it there on your screens now. And it draws the four elements together, which is what are your values and your coaching strengths, and the client's needs and what the client will pay. And I would, as Barry just said, I would encourage you to make an assessment after the initial conversations around, do your values align with the organization's value? To bring this to life with some examples, at the moment I'm coaching a non-exec who's just wonderful and really talented, and it's with an organization that is ambitious to increase its diversity at board level. And my personal values is equality. So the three elements, the three values really align, and this piece of work is a real joy to be involved with. Where there is more ambiguity around whether there is aligned values, I would just encourage you to try and squint a little, and can you see an alignment? It might be that some execs are more on board than others. It might be that the organization's values need to shift from maybe more kind of process and mindsets to more colleague and customer mindset values. But so I would just allow yourself a moment to squint and see if you can draw a level of alignment between all of those pieces. And often where the values are not necessarily explicit, or there's still some ambiguity, those are the most impactful pieces of work that we've done, because the reveal is really powerful and really enrolls executives and some of the senior team and colleagues in terms of getting behind the change, the strategic change. I would also say where there's a clear mismatch in values between your own and the organization, I know from personal experience, it's just much harder to deliver the results. So the question about whether I should work with that organization or they would like to work with me, it might be really, if there are red flags showing up at the start, take time to listen to those and make a full assessment around that. So I can see in the chat that we've got loads of comments, which is great. Thank you, everybody. It was really great to see those pieces coming up. But it might be useful for us to open the room and have some discussion or ask questions. If you don't have questions to mine immediately, I would encourage you just to think about what companies would you like to work with, or if you're internal, what leaders would you like to work with in your own organization? The second question is, what problems would you like to support them with? And what results would you like to help them achieve? These are an adapted set of questions from Joe and Zoe's book. And they might be helpful for you to keep some ideas around at the back end of this conversation. So, Zoe, I don't know if can we open the mic, or if people got any questions?
Yeah, you can feel free to take yourself off mute and speak up. I have a surreal moment that there's my model being shared alongside Kirkpatrick. So thank you for massaging my ego this morning. That was unexpected. I know you two are great advocates of Joe and I, so appreciate that. So yeah, let's hear your questions, guys. What have you got for Barry and Joss?
Thank you for all the lovely statements. It's really sweet. Thank you.
What do we got?
There's a question here. What do you use to explain the return on investment for coaching?
Yeah, I mean, certainly from the conversation I have, the sort of Whitmore's ROI on coaching was really, really sort of useful. And I think without wanting to make, too strong a generalization, working with someone in operations that, business plans, productivity, metrics, and being able to make it much more tangible really, really worked with that engagement. So I think definitely take a look at Whitmore's ROI of coaching, which gives great sort of clarity on a nice little formula that you can use to articulate the value of coaching.
We've got a comment here from Brian, which maybe you can shed some of your opinion on. So Brian's sharing that his aim is to coach senior leaders on being more inclusive and flexible, but he's not sure how big the market is for leaders who actively want to be coached on that. So what's your insight from inside organizations about the sort of market for that? And then, I just saw someone put their hand up and they've disappeared again. So if you had your hand up, pop it up again and I'll come to you next.
Thanks, Zoe. Yeah, Brian, I mean, jump in if you've got more definition around what inclusive and flexible might mean for some of your seniors. I think certainly the work that Barry and I have done is the executives already feel the limitations of having led strategic change in the past, where they are essentially push it off the desk to their lieutenants, say, make it so, and report back to me monthly or weekly. And the approach that we take is, you, as leaders, you need to authentically lead this piece by sharing your own personal reflections on the alignment or the misalignment between the customer values, your own values, and the organization values, and then what are we going to do about it as an organization. So that means that there are the executives often show up as in new ways, and they become more, their language becomes more honest, more values driven, which is particularly important post-COVID and with Gen Z employees coming into the sector, into the employee group. And they are able to, through honest conversations, emotionally engage people in leading change. And that's where the big accelerator and the big shift happens, because often organizations are filled with people who are trying to do their job, but they have change fatigue. And it's when they gain an emotional connection with the executives, and they feel that the executives can see their own values and can see the values of customers and feel the alignment, that they then are more likely to get behind the change piece. So that's the conversation we have with executives. Some get it, they bring that into the room in the initial conversation, and some of them haven't had that experience before. And so those sharp, clean questions really start to bring that alive for them. But have I touched on the right points? Sorry, go ahead, Barry, sorry.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, just as myself as a sort of, head of learning in a corporate organization, the market is huge, and it's right at the center of what we are trying to do. And I think for the points that Joss sort of mentioned, I mean, my organization has a lot of subject matter expert leaders that have, had longevity and expert knowledge in their area, which has led to promotions and managerial sort of positions. I think, as we say, the different generations, COVID, hybrid working, just the world today means that the flexibility and inclusivity is absolutely at the forefront of leadership coaching. And I think for a number of leaders that have maybe built a career on being the expert in the room and knowing the technical knowledge, I think the ability to be coached on their values, how to be inclusive, how to be an authentic leader, how to be okay with not knowing the answer, but having a conversation to do that is critical. So Brian, I think you've hit a real sweet spot there on your niche and market point. So I would say plow on, because there's huge demand for it.
Yeah, and it can be the secret weapon, that ability of an executive to create engagement where the answer isn't certain, and demonstrate listening can be a secret weapon for them. So definitely, yeah. Brian, have we kind of come towards the answer you were seeking there?
Yeah, he's put in the chat. That's good to hear. So thank you.
Brilliant.
I've got a question for you guys, which you may or may not know. So brilliant to hear how to handle the meetings, when you're in conversation with somebody. What would be your inside advice on how to secure those sorts of meetings in the first place? So you must get approaches all the time from coaches, strategists, whoever looking to sell their services into organizations. So what are your thoughts on how to get the foot in the door in the first place?
So I have always been approached word of mouth. So these seniors talk to each other across sector, and what's interesting is the first time they ring you, it might be I remember one executive rang me and I was in an interim directorate role that I couldn't leave contractually, but we had a series of conversations over the phone, and actually I coached her through the really early part of the pieces. And then when I was able to be released from my interim directorate, and then I sat down and had a proper full fat conversation with her, and that was and so there was stages to it, I'm approached. But Barry, you're internal as well, so there might be a slightly different approach you take.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously with my position, I do get approached a lot through sort of LinkedIn. I have to say that the standard sort of request, and then can I show you a demo of this? That doesn't always work very well for me, because again, I don't think it's got that sort of tailored approach. So I think what I'm looking for is probably a bit of creativity. I think people that can use networks is really helpful. So I think, do use networks if you've got people in organizations that can get you an email, or at least a PA's email. I think that's really, really useful. I think that's much better than the sort of LinkedIn sort of cold call that can happen. I'm trying to think. It's a good question, Zoe. So
yeah, I mean, for us, it typically is about relationship building. So and genuine relationship building. And we tend to come from a place of service. So occasionally you'll see people put out on their LinkedIn around a particular challenge or something they have, and we'll offer advice and we'll offer guidance. And that typically then creates a conversation behind the scenes that might lead to either an into that organization or an introduction to another organization. And obviously on the other end of that, there's tenders and things that organizations put out, and we've done a few of those before. But I was just interested to know how it happens for you guys, like behind the scenes. Sounds like you've been involved in a couple of tenders, Barry, and same with you, Jocelyn. How else do you sort of get involved in selecting your providers?
Yeah, I think it's a good point that you raised. If I think about the different providers and coaches that I've worked with, they have probably, and let's be honest, it's probably a slightly longer lead time, but probably have spent a bit more time authentically engaging, asking questions, perhaps giving some advice, and that has led up to a bit of a relationship build, rather than just here I am and here's my offering. And I think that goes back to that sort of second point that we were saying about tailoring engagement. Spend some time, be it on LinkedIn or whatever, responding to executives' blogs or questions or queries, and try and build some sort of rapport and have that visibility of your name or your business. And certainly that definitely resonates with me, because somewhere in the back of my brain I remember the name or the business, and I think, oh, they were quite useful actually. They asked some insightful questions, or I'm then a bit more interested to hear more from their provider. So I think that relationship build, and again, trying to get to more of a tailored conversation for the challenge that I'm dealing with, will get a much higher success rate than here's my glossy brochure, because I get like 50 of those a day just spammed through my LinkedIn.
Yeah. I think the other opportunity of going, I'm not a natural networker. I know lots of people have an initial nervousness around networking, but going to conferences, promoting yourself potentially as a participant or a panel member or something that you're comfortable with, and then researching which organizations in the room and who is representing them. And if making sure that you've got a little bit of understanding of each of the organizations that you want to hit once you're in that room, and some questions. So a bit of research and some sharp questions usually have helped me build my network, and network in terms of people that might want to work with me, but also I want to work with in terms of partnering in terms of delivering some of the pieces that the organizations ask us to help with. So use as many networking opportunities as possible, I would encourage. I can see that Emma has asked a question around the board are not so keen on the coaching, but they now want their first line leaders to be coaching their teams. So not knowing your organization, so jump in, Emma, if I misread it. I think there is some real value at bottom up, driving change in an organization bottom up, or driving adoption, and in this case coaching from a bottom up, in terms of delivering evidence of the impact that it's making. I suspect the seniors have got reasons that they might see as valid now around some of the coaching pieces. I would be surprised if some of them haven't received coaching in any way in the past, because often to achieve a senior role, the coaching plays a part somewhere along the journey. So I wouldn't be nervous around the impact of bottom up ripple, but I would be intentional about how to communicate the impact that coaching is having, so that the seniors can understand it. And then the next conversation would be, so given this is happening, what is the role you then can play, seniors? And that might come as asks at the back end of some of the people who have been coached, for example.
I think sort of, creating your own ripple. I think, I'm fine, but my team need coaching it's not an uncommon perspective. And I think certainly the leadership coaching, as we heard from Marianne, and we'll hear from others today, I think if you have to take the wins that you've got, so there is an opening, and if you can get in there and instill confidence and value-driven leaders that have confidence in their own values, how to lead authentically, those coaches will create their own ripple effect, and you will start to see the impact that they're having on their teams and that pull. And I think that will then start to spike the interest of the senior as to what's different. And then I think your role as an executive coach, once you've got enough rapport, is for that to be an explicit conversation and a challenge with, tell me more about how you see the need for coaching for your team, but you don't. And I think one of the key things that Joe and Zoe talked to us about being an executive coach is the amount of challenge that you have to bring. And that's where the intuition comes in of how much rapport have I got in order to make this challenge. But I certainly wouldn't back away from an organization where the senior doesn't see value of coaching for themselves, but sees it for their team, because I think the work that you can do with that team will create its own ripple. So I'd focus in on that.
It might also be about poor communication from that leader in terms of how that was put out. So we've probably got time for just one other question. I can see they're still coming in, but if you have questions for Joss and Barry, I know they'd be very happy to kind of connect with you on LinkedIn and continue the conversation. So just pick up Katie's, which is, how do you think corporates may receive the idea of empathy coaching? In Katie's eyes, it's a path to inclusion. She's still kind of formulating thinking, but so far the workshops on empathy have gone down well. So how would you see that from the inside?
So my experience in organizations that are looking at empathy and any of those more displaying internally and externally, those more human values are the organizations that have understood that's a critical piece of their success going forward. If you think about organizations that are struggling to stay relevant or keep their customers, not having a human touch, not having not having empathy and understanding of what's important both to customers, colleagues, and society. I think it's just much harder to be that sort of organisation, even B2B. So I would strongly agree that it's a path to inclusion in the widest sense. In terms of trying to turn it into coaching, I think that testing the alignment of values is a key opportunity in terms of coaching. And if I draw on Brian's comment where he says there might be some macho resistance to coaching, definitely some of the seniors who I've engaged with, the values that they've had to display to make themselves successful to the point that they're at are around strength and decisiveness and those sort of skills. And what as a really effective leader, what they're now being asked to demonstrate is empathy, listening, engagement, shared values. And these, for some seniors, it's not necessarily the values that they're highly skilled in demonstrating. So I think the question also comes back to what organizations do you want to work with? Is it the ones with a more traditional mindset that are not open to this? If it's ones that are struggling and working on some of this, that's actually a pretty rich opportunity to gain some big results. But there are also organizations who have really understood empathy in the role that it can play and how listening as an executive makes a big difference. Barry, is there points relevant for you?
Yeah, I'll just echo that really. I mean, certainly the organization I'm working with, I think have just got to that tipping point where they realize, coaching has to be much more focused on empathy, on emotional intelligence. And, we're looking at how we create that sort of pivot. But I think the call out is back to those sort of three questions of, what organizations do I want to work for? What do I want to work with them on? And what results do I want to help them achieve? And I think if you have that clarity yourself, you need to be seeking out and marketing yourself and looking to engage with those organizations where you can see from their website or how their leaders speak that that's the journey they're on. So I think, keep hold of your strength and your passion and find the organizations that want to work with you on it as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Barry and Joss, and to all of you who have joined us for this session. Next up is Ian, who has a session on aligning your values to your career. So we're going to close the call now and hop back on for 11 o'clock. But thank you to you both. I hope you've enjoyed being here in the summit. And thank you to all of you.